I'm Rachael Maza. I'm going to need those on. I'm Rachael Maza. Thank you for the introduction. Yidinji Mariam, and my mother's Dutch. I just also want to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Jaja Warang, and what an incredible honour and a privilege it is to be here, being able to have this yarn on this country, and particularly want to shout out to their elders, their ancestors, and those here today who continue to have to navigate these colonised spaces. So go the Jaja Warang. Okay, so I also work for an obituary theatre company, which I have been working for the last 17 years, and we are one of 3 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander theatre companies, and we are self-determined and sovereign, and we are, I think, we are in the business of making amazing black theatre. And hence my topic today is who owns the story. It was so hilarious trying to think about what, so you've got 7 minutes to talk about something that's important to you. I guess this is my burning issue. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions, provocations. So whose story is it? Who owns the story? Who has the authority to tell the story? And who gets the credit? And who gets the royalties? So you might already be thinking, well, isn't that obvious? It's the person whoever the story is, that's the person who owns the story. So, and I think you're absolutely right, but that's not actually how it works in this country, and I'll get to that shortly. So I've made up a little yarn just to dig deeper into this story. So you've got this Aboriginal auntie sitting down, and she's approached by this white writer who says, I want to tell you your amazing story. And the writer may be someone she knows, maybe it's a friend. Anyway, the auntie's really keen. And she's like, yeah, I'm up for this. Because she knows that by sharing her story and people reading her story, that maybe she's going to, it educates people. And maybe she'll change heart and minds, and ultimately it's for the betterment of her people. So she agrees. So the writer sits down with the auntie and she tells her story. And maybe over several weeks or over several months, she tells her story. She orates and the writer writes. So who owns the story now? The auntie or the writer? Well, according to the Australian Writers Guild, the default is that the writer 100% owns the story, and they will 100% get the royalties. They will also get the kudos, and assuming that the book is an absolute sellout, they'll also get all the awards. And one thing that they don't talk about is they will also build and define their identity, built on a reputation of being an expert in the subject of auntie. So no one's questioning the fact that the writer, of course, has done a mountain of work. They've, with all the research and the writing and the editing and that it's their skills and talents that has made it possible for their book to even exist. But where does this leave our auntie? And what does she get? Well, she probably gets her picture on the front of the cover of the book, so she'll get her moment of fame and attention. And I'm assuming she would have got a nice, generous fee for her one-off fee for doing her contribution to the book. But once things settle down and the money's spent, and I guess life goes back to usual. But she will know that her story is out there and it's being read, and people are reading it and they're getting educated. So that's a good thing. But what about in this scenario that she's actually not happy with the book? Like, what if she's not happy with how her story's been represented? In fact, it's quite inaccurate. Maybe it's even culturally unsafe or culturally inaccurate. So what is her recourse? Is she in a position to be able to demand that the book gets rewritten? Can she stop the book from getting reprinted? Or to stop it from getting printed, I should say? Well, no, she doesn't have. In fact, she has no authority and no power because she has no copyright. So in that scenario, even if that book becomes a bestseller and ends up on the national curriculum and all the kids are reading it, actually, she's completely powerless and there's nothing that she can do about that. And it's true that the book would never have been written if not for that writer. But it's also true that that book would never have been written if not for that auntie. So the question is, in this scenario, what would have been a fairer distribution of the copyright? And of course the royalties. I don't know, more of a 50-50? I don't know, more of a, maybe even 90 for auntie and 10 for the writer. Oh, I'm just saying. Anyway, let's go deeper into my provocation. When is it okay to write someone else's story? Well, I'll give you the answer. When is it not okay to write someone's story? When you are not aware of your subconscious bias about that other. And I'll go a step further. When is it not okay to tell a black story? And the answer is when you're not black. I started out as an actor quite a few years ago. And in my day, the only blackfella roles that were on offer were, on the whole, written by white fellas and directed by white fellas. And on the whole, completely stereotypical, two-dimensional, and terribly written. And the only good, and in fact there were a couple of good roles. The good roles that I did have were written by blackfellas and directed by blackfellas. And I know this is not just me having a whinge about my unsuccessful acting career. But what I'm trying to get at is I'm talking about the deeply problematic dehumanising that happens of blackfellas, keeping them in the other basket, perpetuating the tropes that live deep in the collective subconscious of this nation about Aboriginal people. That we are a primitive race, a dying race, of lower intelligence, etc. And we all know these tropes. These are the tropes that made for a very fertile ground for genocide. One personal example I wanted to give about how insidiously easy it is to get it wrong, even when you're all the best intentions and all the best people in the world, and you can cause harm. And so this was an example, no offence intended here if anyone was involved. It was in fact the last time, for a very good reason, that I would ever agree to become on board a project as a cultural consultant, but that's another story. It was actually an Australian opera production, probably people here saw it, of The Rabbits, which I was super excited about. I don't know if anyone's read that book by John Marsden. It's absolutely brilliant, and these beautiful illustrations by Sean Tan. And it's this incredibly powerful book and it's written in such a kind of powerful and safe way for kids to be able to really sit with the conversation of colonisation and the impacts of colonisation on the colonised. And most importantly though, in this book, the narrative is told from the perspective of the colonised, of the Numbats. So basically the Numbats are the colonised and they're being invaded or colonised by the Rabbits. But the voice is told, the narrative is told of the Numbats. It's their perspective. So the kids get to empathise with those being colonised. So it's just brilliant. But somewhere in the decision-making process at Australian Opera and that creative team, when they adapted this story, they took the narration away from the Numbats and they gave it to this character that's not even in the friggin' book, the fluffy white bird. And I understand why creatively they did that, because the fluffy white bird had the good voice, like the good singing voice. But what it meant was what was a very, I can understand, what seemed like a bit of an easy decision for them to make, taking a bit of theatrical license, turned into what was actually quite a violent act of taking away voice and agency, and effectively dehumanising the colonised. And I know that that's definitely not what the book had intended, the author of the book had intended. So that one little decision effectively took us back hundreds of years and put the Numbats back in the other basket. And they were all, like I said, they were all good people, all really talented, amazing people. And I'm pretty sure no one intended any ill intentions. And it was such an easy mistake mistake to make. But the implications for us as blackfellas was massive. They basically just weren't aware of their subconscious bias. So the moral to my talk is, those whose story it is own the story and must get the royalties and the copyright. And give the numbats back their voice. Thank you.